You guys you haven't turned in the fourth problem set yet, right? That's still in the future. The due date is maybe next week, maybe.
Yeah, I think
Tuesday.
it's due
Okay.
next week. Yeah.
It's actually perfect because this is the last lecture. I mean, this is the end of the material for the course. So that's perfect. Next week, I can just start talking about that exam.
Oh, okay. But
We still have, I mean, there's still time, right? It's just that because of the way
yeah. I mean, I see that we still have 2 more sessions after
right?
this week.
Yeah. So then one session I'll do like the first half of it, and the second session I'll do the second half or something.
Okay.
Or I can just do a general Q&A or something about anything. I don't know. We'll figure it out. So in my other class this morning, we were talking about how sort of popularly we think about the advance of technology as sort of the advance of history. So, you have the Stone Age, and then you have the Bronze Age, then you have the Iron Age. And it's like, then, at some point they invent, whatever, the compass, and then the printing press, and then gunpowder, and then whatever. And, as like each invention sort of pushes history along, and then we're sort of sitting at the top of history because we've invented all of the technologies. You know what I mean? And it's just not necessarily true. I'm thinking about it because I was about to share the Kahoot screen, but then I had this picture up from my other class.
You not think that the people who were living in the golden age would look back and think, oh, those silver age people, goddamn, with their primitive technology.
Can you imagine not having iron? Those people had to get by with bronze.
Yeah.
Like that. But if you guys ever played the game Civ, this is actually Civ 1. This is the very first civilization game. It's, if you haven't played it, it's a game where you sort of you start out with like a very primitive society, and then over time you sort of build up your society and it becomes greater and more powerful. And then eventually you can win in a couple of ways. One, I think, is that you destroy all the other societies in the world. And then the other way you can win, I can't remember what the other one is, but it's kind of a funny view of history. So the idea is just you have to kind of advance through like a tech tree. So you can see that, I'm sure this is very tiny for you guys, but you like start out with like granary, and then, or, let's see here. Okay, well, masonry's got city walls, pyramids, whatever, palace. And then you go to aqueduct, and then you get the wheel, and then you get the steam engine, and then you get banking, etc. So you progress through this tech tree, and the society that progresses the fastest, they sort of have power over the other societies, and then the goal is to destroy all of them. And it's kind of a funny view of history, and it's very sort of self-satisfying, since we're of course sitting at a point where we feel like we have very advanced technologies relative to past societies. So anyway, that's what we were talking about in the other class. So let's do the Kahoot. It's relatively short because I had 2 classes about the same subject, so it was a bit difficult to make how do I do this? Another Kahoot about the same topic, but let's do it anyway. Wait, I gotta stop sharing and reshare so that you guys can hear the music. Okay. It's only 5 questions. It was about time. I was actually thinking about throwing it out like long, but then I was imagining like what it would look like long, and then I decided no. All right, is that everybody? I think so. Let's see how many we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, good. Is the price of a good produced at home or higher at foreign? So if it's a home good, is the price higher at home or is it higher at foreign? Yeah, it's higher at foreign, and the reason why is because remember the way we model the transport costs is this iceberg idea. So the idea is you load your goods onto a ship, and then on the way, some of them fall off. So you can imagine if I'm selling, a shipment of goods from home to foreign, on the way, some of the goods fall off. So in order to sort of be indifferent between selling the good at foreign or selling the good at home, I have to charge more at foreign, because if I put 10 units on the ship, one of them falls off and I only sell 9. So then it has the revenue I get from sending those 10 units has to be the same as the revenue I would have got from selling the 10 units at home. So there has to be a higher price on those 9 units to make up for the one that fell off, basically. So yeah, that's right. Oh, whoops. Okay. I wasn't expecting this to be the second question, but anyway, which one of these is not one of the 6 puzzles? Low consumption growth, correlation, purchasing price disconnect, home bias and portfolio, or Feldstein-Horowitz puzzle? Let's see if I can get anybody. This one is, I'm being picky, but it's very close to natural. Okay, so the actual puzzle is the purchasing power parity disconnect, right? It's not the purchasing price disconnect. So yeah, nothing else to say about that. The other ones are all part of the list.
Isn't this the same question as last time?
It's the same, except for I don't think I had the same incorrect one, right? I had maybe I did. I think I had. Didn't I have the home bias disconnect?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's close.
But it was the same idea, the trick.
Definitely the same idea. Definitely the same idea. Two symmetric countries, no trade costs. Home consumers hold what share of their equity in foreign? Yeah, exactly. It's 50%, right? The countries are symmetric. There's no trade costs. So in order to sort of ensure, we're talking now about the home bias and portfolio puzzle. So the puzzle we're trying to explain is that people tend to invest a lot in their own country. But what we're showing here is that suppose that there's one good from foreign, there's one good at home, and sort of those 2 goods are hit by idiosyncratic shocks. So then the idea is if there's no trade costs, how do I insure myself against the shocks? The best thing I can do is to sort of own half of the foreign and half of the home stock good. And then that way those idiosyncratic shocks kind of balance out. So yeah, that's right. Okay, what actors explain the exchange rate disconnect puzzle? Consumers, retailers, producers, or wholesalers? This was maybe a not super precisely worded question. I think I'll have to reword this again. So if you do your best, but I'll tell you what I was expecting, and then oh, okay, well, maybe it was okay. But yeah, so the idea is that we see that there's arbitrage opportunities when we look at the price that goods are sold for, like at the supermarket, and then we compare it to what it's sold for in some other place. But the thing is, it's not easy for me to actually take advantage of that arbitrage opportunity. If I want to actually find somebody to buy bananas from Denmark I have to actually know who's buying bananas in Russia or something like that. It's not easy. I don't know who that is. It takes work to figure that out, and it's not something that I'm going to be able to take advantage of. So the idea is these wholesalers, I guess you guys will know because you got it all right, but the wholesalers, they do take advantage of arbitrage opportunities. It's just that they sort of price to market. So they're selling the bananas for more in Denmark because they think that the Danish banana demand is such and such. So they themselves, if you could look at the wholesale prices, then you wouldn't see the kind of arbitrage opportunities you see when we look at retail prices. So yeah. Okay, that's it. That's not it. There's one more. Trade barriers have fallen over the last 30 years. What do you expect has happened to foreign equity holdings in the last 30 years? Yeah, I expect that they've increased, right? So the idea is that what causes, according to the model for the trade, the home bias in portfolios, the reason why you invest more in your home country is that when you invest in the foreign country, if the foreign country has like a very good year, you want to take some of those goods back to your own country to consume them. But the problem is that when those goods go on a ship, some of them fall off along the way. So it makes it not so attractive to invest in that foreign country. That's the idea. So since trade barriers have fallen, it means that, through the lens of the model, less goods are falling off the ship. So investing in foreign isn't as bad as it used to be. So we would expect that people would invest more in foreign equity. And I was actually kind of clicking around trying to find a good metric for this. And I couldn't find any like really obvious data to back this up. But one thing I know has happened is that these big market tracking index funds. So for example, Vanguard is a big player in that space, and there's many others as well. So it's funds that sort of mutual funds that try to just replicate the entire stock market, either the entire stock market of the United States or the entire stock market in the world, or the entire stock market in, say, Europe or in China. And I think that those players are really, really big, much bigger than you'd think. So how do they work? They buy like a little bit of all kinds of different stocks in these markets to try to replicate the market. And it's like, I want to say like maybe 30% of the value of the stock market is being held by these market tracking index funds or something like that, some crazy high number. And since that's true, I would expect that you would see more diversification across borders over the last 30 years, since that's like a relatively new phenomenon. But I couldn't find the right picture to show it, but this is exactly what I would expect, and it seems like what you'd expect as well. So we have already reached the podium. And haircut wins. All right, cool. So let me stop that one. And then I will reshare my slides. Okay, so here they are. Ask away. This is all we have today, by the way, because the next assignment is due next week. And then this is actually the end of the course content. So probably next week I'll solve maybe half of the exam from last year, and then the following week I'll solve the other half. That's the idea. I must say it's weird. I went in today, I actually did the grading for the last problem set yesterday and today. And it's weird to get, I get like 60 of them, right? It's like because your entire program is filling out the problem sets, but of course I only see the 7 of you or the 6 or 7 of you, the regulars at these Q&A sessions. Any questions? Actually, for me, I think I mentioned this in the video, but I thought this home bias and portfolio is the most interesting thing in the paper. So, home bias and trade, as I probably said, it's just direct, right? I mean, if there's high trade costs, then of course you're going to consume more of the goods produced in your own country. It's just expensive to consume things produced elsewhere. So this one it's very direct, right? This one, the Feldstein-Heroica puzzle, it's still, the intuition to me doesn't feel that solid. And I think one reason why is because you need that shift from exporting to importing. And it just seems like a very stark way to think about the world. You don't see that many shifts in terms of goods, plus lots of goods are traded both ways, cars, I think we talked about. And then the other thing about it is it really relies strongly on this idea that you're a small open economy. So you take the interest, the interest rate is given, the sort of foreign interest rate is fixed. So because of that, it's interesting, but it's not. I think there's some very strong assumptions there. This one actually I really like, this home bias and portfolio. I think it's very clever, and I think it actually does kind of make sense that ultimately, goods need to be traded eventually, and when goods are traded, there's costs. So that sort of tells you why you want to invest in your own country, so that you don't have to pay the costs when you want to eventually sort of cash in your investments. It seemed clever, at least. Number 4 is just very similar to number 2, and then number 5 and 6, it's very hand wavy. I mean, I think it sounds reasonable, the argument. So the argument is, we already just mentioned it, right? That wholesalers, they're the ones that actually arbitrage. So if you could see wholesale prices, they would actually not be so disconnected from the exchange rate. But there's, it's no more than really just that sentence that I just said that's in the paper. So.
Maybe we can just ask something about the exam instead. I don't have a question to this. So you mentioned that we should be able, or I mean, you mentioned this last year in the videos, but I guess it's the same, that we should be able to solve something like the puzzle 1 and 2, the problem that you set up there. Could you maybe show exactly what you mean by that? And then also for the other models, do you expect us to actually, derive part of it, or is it more like these problem sets where there's some, I don't know, let's say a bit of a variation of something and then some insight or something like that? Because I mean, some of them are, let's say, more difficult than others, and
that's true. So I mean, the ones on the slide shouldn't be too difficult. I recall that they're relatively straightforward to solve. In the past, they've been part of problem sets, but generally my exams always have the same format, and now you have 2 examples, right? So there's the example that's just on Canvas, and then the problem set is also that is the final exam from last year. So they always have that format, and you'll see top short answers. That's stuff that's almost Kahoot-like. And then the second section is calculations, and those are almost always based on problem set problems. So there'll be an iteration on a problem set problem. I don't actually recall what I asked last year, but I'm almost sure that it was some sort of variation on one of the problems from the problem sets. And then usually just a little short essay that's like asking you to apply something from the class to the real world. So I don't know if that answers your question, but if you can solve the problems from the problem sets and understand the models, I would say that's probably enough.
Yeah, that's good. Otherwise, maybe we could go through, let's say, the course and see, maybe you could again explain like what is the outcome of each model or something like that. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has a question about this, but the last three, I mean, they were not that difficult, right? Because you just had one slide and one idea basically. So there was no real calculations.
Do you mean these 6 puzzles, or do you mean like the takeaways from the kind of the intuition and the takeaways from each puzzle?
I mean, more from the things before, because
Okay.
I mean, we can leave a bit of time for other people to ask questions if they have, but at least for me, these puzzles are pretty clear.
Okay. So I mean, we could click through the slides. I mean, equally easily, we could just kind of talk through the, I mean, if you want, that's going to be a lot of sort of clicking through slides, but otherwise, we can just think about them right now. So, there's basically a growth section of the course. There's a business cycle section of the course, and then there's these international macro puzzles. That's the whole course. And then in the growth section, it's split into solar growth model, and then the neoclassical growth model, then the overlapping generations model, and then the Romer endogenous growth model. Okay, so there's those 4 models. And Romer model, it's a growth model, but there's no decisions in it. In some ways, it's not really even an economics model since nobody's making a decision. Just savings rate is given. And then in the neoclassical growth model, people choose their savings rate, and optimally, it's perfect information, forward-looking model. And sort of the conclusion from both of those models is that the long-run growth in per capita income depends only on technological improvements, which you're just talking about, and capital. The whole model is really about the dynamics of capital, and kind of what you find out is because of the curvature, the decreasing returns to capital, fixing labor. You find out that can't sustain growth forever. So eventually, sort of the capital accumulation that's only going to help in the medium term. In the long run, it's all about technology. Okay, so that's kind of the lesson from those first 2 models. Solo, you assume the savings rate. Neoclassical, they choose it. It doesn't really affect the result. Then you have the overlapping generations model, and in that model, things can go more crazy. Things can be kind of weird because of the equation that gives you the evolution of capital. It's got capital on both the left-hand side and the right-hand side, so you can get all kinds of weird dynamics. But the kind of the message from that model, I think, is that you can get a situation where the market allocation is actually not efficient. So you could actually make everyone better off if you actually forced young people to save less in one generation. So everything's going along in the market equilibrium, and then one generation you force the young people to save less. You can actually make both that generation better off and every generation that follows better off. So you get this sort of dynamic inefficiency. So that's kind of the message of that model. Let's see here. The next one is the endogenous growth model. And that one, you see the way that the patent system affects the level of innovation, and you get this interesting trade-off between market power and the speed of growth. So the idea is if you have no market power, then nobody ever wants to invent any new ideas. So then there's no growth. But if you have a lot of market power, well, that's great. That gives firms lots of incentive to invent new technologies. But there's a trade-off, which is that if firms have lots of market power, that reduces consumer welfare, right? And not even consumer welfare. It causes sort of deadweight loss because the monopolists produce less than is socially optimal, right? So you got this trade-off between the protection of intellectual property, which gives more growth, but then also reduces the static efficiency, if you like, in the economy. So that's kind of it for the growth models. Any questions about those?
No, that was very good. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Go on with the business cycle models. You've got the real business cycle model. So what that model shows is if you have forward-looking agents and you have everybody making optimal decisions, you can still get a business cycle through having persistent shocks to technology. And it doesn't really look, so everybody's rational, everybody's doing the best they can, and yet still you can get persistent business cycle dynamics that look somewhat realistic without having any sort of weird people being fooled by having wrong expectations or people making decisions that are bad for themselves. You know, previous to the real business cycle models, these old style Keynesian models, they often had people that were making decisions that just weren't good for themselves. So, you know, you'd have like you'd have these sort of multiplier effects. Like for instance, if the government demands more, then more is produced. And since production is also income of somebody, then the people sort of consume more because all they see is that their income went up. So they then consume more. But in a sense, they're sort of being duped because the government, in order to spend more, it's going to have to tax more in the future or something like that. So if they had rational expectations, they wouldn't increase their consumption. That's like a critique of that old-fashioned style Keynesian models. So these real business cycle models, the point is to show that you don't need to have any sort of tricky expectation tricks or anything to get a business cycle to happen. You can get business cycle dynamics with forward-looking, purely rational agents making decisions that are the best they can for themselves. And then all you got to do is just shock technology. So, you know, this year there's a lot of rain, so the farms produced more wheat. So that leads to a boom. And right, so that's kind of the point of that model, is that you don't need to have anything weird in there. And also, the best thing for the government to do in that model is to do nothing. Any sort of government intervention is going to make things worse than it would be if just people are doing what they're doing. Okay, so that's RBC. The next one we did, I think, was I want to say menu cost model. So the menu cost model is then a little bit different. So the menu cost model says that firms can't adjust their prices immediately. So that leads to, through the mechanisms in this model, the possibility that relatively small menu costs make it so that firms won't change their prices even if there's relatively large shocks. And the reason why is because of this sort of game theoretical reasons that you can look at in the model. So the idea is if no one else changes their prices, then it can actually, then potentially for me, it does very little for me to change my prices. So yeah, that's kind of the point of that model, is that menu costs also sort of explain why, well, let's see here. So we want menu costs to explain a business cycle. So they're going to explain why firms don't, they're going to explain why when the government prints money, it can be that, you know, all the prices just don't double. Because you could imagine a world like an RBC world, like a real business cycle world, where if the government just prints twice as much money, all the prices go up twice as much, all the wages go up twice as much, everything is flexible, and nothing changes in the real economy. So a menu cost model says, wait a second, the government actually can do something. They actually can do monetary policy that has an effect. Why is that? Because firms aren't going to change their prices due to these menu costs that they have. Okay. Then we have this Lucas information model, which has the same sort of flavor. And the idea is, since firms can't perfectly observe whether the signals they're seeing, the price signals they're seeing, are due to government printing money, or if they're due to demand shocks for the individual firm, then the firms are going to, if the government prints money, the firms are going to sort of be tricked into producing more than they would have otherwise wanted to produce, because they think that some of the price signal they're getting is due to a firm-specific demand shock, when it's actually due to the government printing money, right? So that's the idea there, is that, again, money having a real effect on the economy. And then finally, we talked about this Dsg model. With that one, it's putting these ideas together, but in a simple way, to show how surprises to monetary policy can filter through the economy. basically. And that one is more about kind of plug and chug. So what happens if you shock money 10% and it's, has a certain amount of persistence, then how is that going to affect output and interest rates in the next 10 years? So it's more of a methods type of model rather than a theoretical type of model. Okay, so that's the business cycle. So RBC showing that you don't need any sort of weird expectations, money can be neutral and you can still get a business cycle. Then a reaction to that, which is these new Keynesian models where they say, but wait a second, it seems like when the Fed makes an announcement, there actually is a reaction. And if so, how can we put that into a model? Menu costs are one way, imperfect information, that's another way. And then sort of putting those two things together into a model where you can actually simulate an economy. That's the Dsg model. And yeah, and that's the unit on the business cycle. And then the last one is the one we just talked about, this international macro puzzles section. And that's kind of that's the course in a nutshell, I would say. I should have emphasized more about the money. Yeah, right. So there's this old quantity theory of money that says that the amount of money in the economy doesn't matter, because if there's more money, prices go up. If there's less money, prices go down. It doesn't have any sort of real effect on the economy. And then there's the new Keynesian models that say, well, wait a second, it can and it does have an effect. I saw an interesting piece about Bitcoin. You guys probably know that Bitcoin is like a super dirty type of currency. It's like the environmental footprint of Bitcoin is absolutely atrocious.
I like that you called it a currency.
What was that?
I like that you called it a currency.
Well, yeah. I guess it is a cryptocurrency, right? I don't think that is that controversial.
You can't pay taxes with it, so I don't think it's a currency.
Okay, well, I guess it's a bit of a it's a bit of a definition issue. How do we define a currency? I mean, if we define a currency by you can pay taxes in it, then I guess it's not a currency. You can buy a lot of stuff with it though. But I guess you can also buy a lot of stuff with gold. Is gold a currency? No.
No. It's an asset, just like cryptocurrencies.
Sure, fair enough.
All right, back to the puzzles. Anyway, the purchasing power parity disconnect. I mean, that's like a well-known fact that the purchasing power, like the law of one price, doesn't really work. And that's why they kind of talked about the relative purchasing power parity, where they have it in logarithms, so it works better.
Yeah, I think that's true to a degree. I think you have to be a bit careful though, because there's a lot of non-traded services that, when you think about sort of buying things in different countries, then I think often a lot of the differences in price are due to differences in the price of services. So for example, if I buy something in Denmark, a meal in Denmark, and then I go to Turkey and buy a restaurant meal, the Turkish meal is way cheaper. It's like not even close. It's like, maybe 10% or something, or 20% of what it would cost in Denmark. But, the reason why it's cheap is because of the cheap services. I can't directly export a restaurant meal, even though food is part of that. And food you can export. You can't export the service. So I think that's explaining part of it. Even retail, it service, right? Somebody's got to stock the shelves. Somebody's got to check you out. You might ask, why is it that services are cheaper in poor countries? And that's a famous international economics thing called the Balassa-Samuelson effect. You guys heard of that before? So the idea is that if you're a Danish worker, say, Danish has some very high productivity manufacturing industries, say chemicals or pharmaceuticals or something like that. So it's like if you're working in a service job, whatever, manning the desk at a hotel, then your outside option is to work in a very high productivity manufacturing industry that produces tradables. So the idea would be that because of that outside option, that drives up the wages of the hotel job. Now, suppose that I were in, I don't know, Bangladesh. Maybe there's not such high productivity manufacturing tradable industries available. So then, that's going to keep the manning the hotel desk job cheap, because the outside option is not very attractive. So that's why haircuts are cheaper in some places than in other places, even though it's the same technology, right? I mean, it's all somebody cutting your hair with the scissors. It's not really a different haircut in Turkey or in Denmark or in Bangladesh. Okay. So I don't have anything else to say about the 6 puzzles here. I guess we just kind of went through the whole course's content just now. But this is actually the last bit of content that's going to be on the exam. Of course, I'll go through the problem sets as well. So that's kind of it. Next week, I'll go through part of the exam and then part of the exam the following week. And I think that will be it. Any questions?
Can I ask you one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm having a hard time imagining how you're gonna bring these puzzles up on the exam, except if you just kind of give us a model and then make us explain some of the solutions to them, I guess.
Well, I mean, I can certainly ask the Kahoot type questions, right?
Yeah.
So that's most likely where they're going to show up, but not on this one, but on the last one. Let me quick find my other slides here. So here I had a couple of questions. Right here, home bias exercise. Derive demand and show that omega functions similarly to trade costs when countries are symmetric. So here you can actually just solve for what is CH and CH star. And then you'll see that the way that omega enters the model is very similar to the way the trade costs enter. So, there's something that maybe I could potentially appear on an exam. I think there's 2 exercises here. There should be one more down here somewhere. An idea, if I have time, is I could actually solve through these 2. I don't want to do it right now because I haven't looked at them to make sure that I can solve fluidly without making everyone confused. But this one I recall is actually very straightforward. This one is just taking this equation and plugging in numbers. So I mean, it should be fairly straightforward. So pH star, PF star is equal to 1, theta 6, tau is 0.1, and R star is 0.5. So yeah, here you just plug in 1 and then plug in all the numbers and then you just answer the question. But yeah. So that's how those would appear, I guess. I'm not sure. I didn't look at the, when I assigned almost always for the last problem set, I just assigned the final exam from the last year. So I didn't relook at what I had assigned there, but I wonder if there's any questions about the 6 puzzles. I think there is. I think there's one in the short answer section, I recall, but I could be confused because, I write a final and then I almost always also have to write a retake. and then I get them confused sometimes. Any other questions? So I wonder if you guys, do you think there's any chance at all that we would actually be able to be in class together, like maybe for the last class? Because I think that actually they're saying that by the 21st. Okay, that's going to be too late though, right? On the 21st, I think there's going to be a change in whether we can actually go to class or not. But I guess it's irrelevant. It's too bad.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think
Our teacher who was teaching a class yesterday went on a bit of a rant about it, about being unimportant stuff.
yeah, it's really too bad. I mean, it's just, I'll have to decide what I do with the lectures, but you know, with these like exercise classes and also just discussion, you know, usually in your course, I used to have a lot more discussion about, you know, things that are related, like things that were related to what's happening in the news and stuff like that. But it's just harder to do it in online. So I guess we'll see what happens next year, but it is what it is for this year. Any other questions? I saw somebody just blinked off. Okay, if not, that's it. I'll see you next week and we'll be solving part of the last problem set. Okay. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks. Bye.